will help in funding the climate initiatives. Then you have a participatory approach wherein you get to see that it involves all the stakeholders, the communities involved, the governments, the scientists, and all the organizations. They try to see that they have a diverse perspective and they are included in the decision making. At the same time, it's a joint management wherein you get to see that there's not a lot of exploitation of the resources. Next is your adaptive management, wherein in this you have a dynamic and a conservation strategy that is involved, which will help in making necessary adjustments according to the time so that there is more effectiveness in the conservation happening. Again, it is a cultural and ethical responsibility. And at the same time, you have the restoration and rehabilitation. All of this help in you have to recognize the particular traditional knowledge that is there and implement it. The tribals have a very good knowledge of what is going on and how to conserve and preserve their areas. That is why the tribal belts that are there are still in a very pristine and they give a lot more. It's a biodiversity area, in fact. And then you need to see that there are economic incentives so that farmers are going to receive some kind of payment so that they maintain the forest and they do not go and do deforestation just to get farmland. And legal and constitutional institutional frameworks that help in what you call it. You need to make laws and policies so that the area is protected, and then you need to have international agreements also, like the conventions on biological diversity. All of this is like a shared responsibility on global conservation. Now you need to educate people right from the school age onwards that it is absolutely necessary for us to conserve our nature and biodiversity so that if you live and let live, that is when you are going to be able to say sustain the next generation. If you are over exploiting in this generation, then it is not going to be available for the next generation, which happens to be our own children. So that is very important that we do education and awareness. And schools, media, and non-governmental organizations, they have a very important, significant role in spreading the conservation awareness. And climate resilience is like when you stick to these principles, that is when we are able to use the by available resources, protect biodiversity, and at the same time have a good relationship between the humans and the environment. It is a shared responsibility which actually needs or demands a collective action from all of us put together, and it is a long-term commitment. Now, what are the principles of conservation? We talk about so many things that we have to conserve. So, what are the principles that we need to practice so that there is a long-term benefit, and our children and their children have the the natural resources. First is sustainable use, which is very important. It involves selective logging areas, and then again you need to replant so that there is an ecological balance. Same thing with fisheries. The precautionary principle. So over here you need to be careful because whatever actions by the human beings, it is causing a significant harm to the environment. Then biodiversity conservation. Again, over here you need to protect the endangered species. You need to see that there are more wildlife sanctuaries and biodiversity hotspots to be identified, so that what happens is your genetic pool is being maintained. Intergenerational equity is also the same thing. I think this has been repeated anyway. So what else? Cultural ethical responsibility, like I told you, indigenous communities, example tribals, have a long-standing tradition of living in harmony with nature. So this is the best area wherein they utilize, they have the rituals and they have the principles which they follow and adhere to strictly, which helps in conserving their area in a best manner. In fact, restoration, rehabilitation also, lost forest area And lost coral reef, they have to be restored. And again, economic incentives, like I told you, they, if at all you are paying some kind of an incentive, it's as simple as the fact that you need to give a chocolate to a kid so that they get to make you do something. Everyone works on the principle of incentives. There is very less percentage of people who are altruistic, who do it for the greater good. So in this case scenario, you just give a little bit of payment, not because they are your like what do you call it? It is not something like a bribery, but then it is an incentive because of the economical factors that they face and the economical hardships that they face. That if you give an incentive, it is like you're sustaining their livelihood as well, so that they do not go and deforest. So then, like I said, legal institutional frameworks, and then what do you call it? Then the educational awareness in the schools and medias, and the climate resilience. These points have been repeated. That's what I've been saying. So, what are the major approaches to manage the conservation? So, conservation is again two types, which is in situ and ex situ. In situ conservation is a protected area such as national park, wildlife sanctuary, biosphere reserves. So, in this, there is a restriction of human activities such as logging or hunting or industrial development. So, these are like, safe spaces for all the species to thrive. You're not supposed to, again, I think they're divided into core and then buffer and like, what do you call it, zones, in fact, wherein you're not supposed to go into the core zone. Example is Yellowstone National Park. It's one of the best national parks in the whole wide world. In our country, we have our Jim Corbett National Park. We have so many national parks and coral reefs. The Andaman Nicobar, Lakshadweep in India have coral reefs. Then you have coral reefs in the Australian, the Great Barrier Reef, and then you have coral reefs in Thailand. So you have different places. Even if you touch the coral reef, most corals die. That is how sensitive they are. So we need to see that we are safeguarding and protecting the coral reefs. And then you have the habitat restoration. So you see that in one place, if there is any kind of habitat degradation occurring, flora fauna are not able to thrive in that area, you're trying to restore that particular habitat. And then you build a wildlife corridor which will connect the ecosystem so that the animals start moving freely along. Then you have the exit to conservation, which is the protecting the species outside their natural habitats, which is the zoo parks and the botanical gardens. That is where it's an artificial area wherein you try to create a say which will simulate the natural habitat. And then seed banks and gene banks. This is where example is where Svalbard Global Seed Vault Bank, which stores different kind of plant species seeds so as to safeguard the genetic diversity. This is one gene bank. Then you have cryopreservation. This is where you are going to try to preserve the cells, the egg cells and the sperm cells of threatened species. In India, it is the Ongol ox. So there is, what do? You freeze or you store the sperm and the eggs in the liquid nitrogen minus 196 degrees Celsius. So when you do this cryopreservation, you can store it for 20 years, prolong it like that, in fact, so that you have those cells. You do not have, what do you call it, even if the live species are dead, you can what do you call it, in vitro fertilization, and then produce a progeny. So you can also use it for improvement of livestock, ensuring the survival of invaluable heritage lineages and species. Then captive breeding, reintroduction also is the same thing. The Arabian oryx is one example, wherein from captivity they were like what do you call it? They captive. They like what do you call it? Catch hold of those oxen, and then they breed in the captivity itself, so that more number of species or more number of population progeny comes, so that population increases. Then you have the community-based conservation, wherein you try to co-manage all of this. Example is the Namibian community-based natural resource management. wherein local groups are there, they help in conservation of the wildlife around them. So again, it is both. It will actually increase their livelihood. It gives them economic independence. At the same time, there's a conservation of the area or the natural life around it. Ecotourism is one of the most popular ways wherein you use tourism for increasing the economic incentive and at the same time conservation of the what do you call it, ecology or the bio is happening over here. Example is your Masai Mara in Kenya. Ecotourism helps protect the wildlife. At the same time, it gives the local population economic stability. So you use sustainable reusing. Then you have different kinds of interventions or policies. In fact, you have the Wildlife Protection Act. Then so you have the what do you call it? That was for India. It was in 1972. In fact, then you have the Endangered Species Act. You have different kinds of international agreements and impact assessments, which has to be implemented. Those rules have to be strictly followed. And then you have the application of technology. How are you going to use the technology in trying to conserve a particular area? Nowadays, you have your drones. So you're going to use your remote sensing GIS, that is, use your satellites for the same thing. You have a lot of satellites all over, our sky is filled with satellites from different countries trying to have a look at everything. It has been used for all kinds of purposes, right from for climate monitoring to geographic information to map ecosystems in fact, and then to detect illegal activities, of course, defense purposes, all of it. You have your camera traps and drones. Camera traps tell you about a particular animal. For example, a tiger. They track you put in camera traps at different areas. They help in tracking a particular animal. Then genomic tools are there, and then you have the AI and the big data. So they help in predicting a pattern, and then what are the poaching hotspots, etc. And then what you're going to do is integrate landscape and seascape management, wherein you see that we need to realize that a land ecosystem and a sea ecosystem is not completely isolated. There is an area, ecotone, which is a buffer area. So you need to see that you have a better management approach so that your landscape or the seascape will not lose its particular balance. Now we have something called as biosphere reserves. They were given by or designated by the UNESCO. They help in integrating the conservation and sustainable use along with education. So they have core, then you have buffer zones, and you have a transition zone in the middle. So core zone is where in protected area you're not supposed to enter it. It is exclusively for the animals. Buffer zones is for limited human activities, and the transition zone is wherein you do tree timber logging, etc. So you have the Sundarbans Biosphere Reserve in India and Bangladesh. This helps in protecting the mangrove forests. Then you also have the marine spatial planning, wherein human activities in the oceans are going to be planned accordingly so that there is not going to be much of a conflict. And at the same time, there is a bit of biodiversity conservation happening. So this is one thing. Now, you have different kinds of case studies on this conservation of management strategies, basically. You have different kinds of programs such as joint forest management. Convention on the biological diversity also has given its proactive role, in fact. And so certain case studies have been there. So there was one thing called Project Tiger, which was launched in 1973. That was because the population of the tiger had come down to two-figure rating. In fact, it was just around 11 or 12 thanks to different kinds of poaching that was taking place. So with that, they implemented it in such a manner that the project initially had only 9 tiger reserves. Then you had core zones and stringent protection measures. See, the reason being tiger flesh, tiger skin, and a live tiger, you like the talons of the tiger, the claws were all very let's say it had a huge demand in the black market in the Asian countries. So with that, and then and gaming or hunting was very popular during the colonial era. So with all of this, the Bengal tiger had faced a rapid declination in the population. So they had to get it back. So the program was like started with 9 tiger reserves, expanded to 53 with around 75,000 square kilometers covered. So they relocated whole villages from the core zone so that there was not much of human wildlife conflict. Strict anti-poaching measures were taken, and then you had camera traps, GPS collars for monitoring. So it was a success because from around 1411 tigers in 2006, there was an ad that was going on in 2006. I do not know how many of you know that, which just said 11, only 1411 tigers are left. It has now come to around 3,000, which is nearly double in 2023. So it has been a success, but it still has challenges because of the habitat fragmentation, poaching, human wildlife conflict, all of it going on. And then we have the biosphere reserves. This is going to be covered in the next topics as well. So I'll just go through it just basically. Core zone, strictly protected area. You're not going into it. You're not allowed in. Buffer zones, education, limited human activities. Transition zone, you have resources available. Then you have timber depots over there. So all of that is there. So what are the different biosphere reserves in India? You have the Nilgiri, the Western Ghats. So you have the lion-tailed macaque and the Asian elephant over there. In case if you know, the Periyar Wildlife Sanctuary is in the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. It comes from the Western Ghat, all of this. In fact, all your the Konkan belt, and then you have the Kerala Nilgiri, the Tamil Nadu Nilgiri belt goes down till the Periyar. Then you have the Sundarbans Biosphere Reserve, which is there, shared between India and Bangladesh, and it is home to Royal Bengal tiger. And you have the largest mangrove forest in the whole world. And then you have the Nanda Devi Biosphere Reserve, which is present in Himalayas. Over here, you have the Valley of Flowers National Park also, Uttarakhand, and that side. So it is a beautiful area, and you have a lot of flowering plant species, in fact. Again, you have a lot of challenges over here, mismanagement, inadequate funding, encroachment, poaching, all of it. So, notable successes have been seen in tiger recovery, restoration of the ecosystem, especially Orissa, Chilka Lake, community involvement like one panchayats in Uttarakhand have been developed for this. So, current status is that India has evolved and it has started so much of trying to preserve our ecological biodiversity. That is, your Project Elephant is there, National Action Plan on Climate Change is there. So, thanks to the floods in Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, all of these areas, you have, that has caused significant depletion. So, we are trying to get it back onto the roots. So, how are you going to do the conservation? So, you have something called as the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and it has given a book called as the Red Data Book, which talks about the list of threatened species, which gives you the inventory, including including the plants, animals, fungi, microorganisms, and it has categorized all the species into different categories. One is extinct. Example is the dodo. It is not extinct anymore. The African rhinoceros the black African rhinoceros is not existing anymore. So it is extinct. Then the stellar sea cows, they're extinct. Then extinct in the wild. So certain animals are extinct in the wild, but they're available or they're still existing in captivity. So that is there. And then you have the critically endangered. They face the highest risk of extinction. Then you have the endangered species. So very high risk of extinction. Vulnerable, near threatened, least concern. So they thrive a lot. Data deficient. We do not know about enough information about that particular animal or plant or species to assess the risk it faces of of it becoming extinct. and they're not evaluated. So the red data book has been is a very critical book, in fact. And then you have the impact of it, which shows that Project Tiger, because of the red data book and the global snow leopard ecosystem protection program, were formed by having a look at the data, red data book, in fact. Then how do you conserve the rare species? So you have rare species in India, such as the snow leopard. What is the status? Vulnerable. Where is it located, or where is the snow leopard found? In Himalayas. So what are the different kinds of laws? So you have schedules, Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act. So that goes with the Indian pangolin also. It is an endangered species, which is present in grasslands. So all of this, they follow the Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act. And then you have the red panda. It's found in the eastern Himalayas and it is an endangered species. Then near threatened, meaning it is almost threatened to be extinct. So you have Indian giant squirrel. Then you have the Nilgiri thar. It is again endangered. Lion-tailed macaca is also endangered. So Schedule 1, 2 of the Wildlife Protection Act. You have different kinds of conservation efforts such as, for habitat protection or conservation products. So you have the dugong. Dugong is in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. It's actually, if I'm not wrong, it's a sea or a marine animal. Gulf of Mannar, Gulf of Kutch. So that is where it is there. It is a vulnerable species. Near threatened, Indian hornbill. Where is it present? Western Ghats, Northeast India. In fact, it is the state bird of Arunachal Pradesh. There is a hornbill festival in Arunachal Pradesh. And you have the Himalayan foothills, wherein you have the Indian hornbill. So all of these are there. You have the tortoises, different kinds, the Gangetic River dolphin, in fact. So how do you conserve them again? By seeing that there is no poaching, there is a project wildlife corridor built, human and wildlife interaction is minimized, so that they live in peace. So, and the different animals have been given. All these examples, you please try to remember a couple of them so that you'll be able to write the examples. Fetch your marks. It would also be great that you remember it and then you talk to about it to other people and then make them more aware of the fact that they're all threatened or vulnerable species. All right. So this is about this lesson about conservation. In fact, so you have the IUCN, which is International Union for Conservation of Nature, that plays a important role through the red data book that is there. It helps us about it gives an assessment of the different kind of species and how we are going to conserve them by either habitat restoration or minimizing the human wildlife conflicts using biosphere reserves, etc. So this is about our lesson about conservation biology. Now let us go to the next lesson, which happens to be the biodiversity. In biodiversity, now when you come to this, you get to see it is the different kinds of variety or like life species that are amongst us. Okay, so finally you get to see that it is how you're going to have the different kind of species that are living along with us, and at the same time, how many or what do you call it? How is agricultural produce present, or how are fisheries according to what we have the choice, and how do they prosper when marine ecosystems are maintaining this predator prey relationships. So all of that for that matter. So despite all of it, biodiversity is still under threat thanks to human activities, which is habitat destruction, global biodiversity, overexploitation of species, climate change, and then you introduce invasive species. The catfish, if they are introduced into any kind of water body, they are an invasive species. They will not let any other species stay into it. So, because of this, there is a problem because other species do not thrive, you do not have a proper ecological balance there. And at the same time, you have habitat shrinking, degradation happening, And finally, what you need to see that biodiversity is a scientific concept. It helps us build a particular method of surrounding, method how as to how to see that our own ecosystem thrives with a different kind of species in them. So if you come to the definition of biodiversity, you see that it is the diverse range of life on Earth. It covers all the variety of species. You have with the genetic differences within the species and the diversity of the ecosystem. So this is the definition of biodiversity. Now, when you talk about diversity or biodiversity, what is it that you're talking about? First is genetic diversity. Genetic diversity, that is your genes that are present inside the species are going to be slightly different. So example is wildflowers. Some plants have genetic traits that give resistance to drought or disease. And then this genetic diversity, when it is present, it strengthens the resilience or the capability to withstand the disturbances. It reduces the vulnerability to threats and promotes long-term survival. Then you have species, different kind of species of the same genus. So that is one thing. And then you have the ecosystem diversity, wherein different kinds of ecosystems are present because of the difference in the habitat, difference in the ecological communities that is present. So we need to consider this. Then what is the status of biodiversity? Again, you have an International Union for Conservation of Nature. You have a red list. You have endangered, critically endangered. That is there even for biodiversity hotspots. Additionally, you have intergovernmental science policy platforms on the biodiversity and ecosystem services, which helps in showing how the biodiversity is declining. And how do you monitor them? You need to monitor them so that you have up-to-date information regarding this biodiversity hotspots of places, so that you can take appropriate action. So how do you do that? Using field surveys and inventories. You need to see on ground. You use again different you either use the species. You calculate the particular area and extrapolate the number of species or presence of certain lichens. So when you talk about lichens, you talk about the air quality also. Abundance of amphibians reflects the integrity of freshwater habitat. So you calculate one, you can talk about the whole species area as well. Then you use remote sensing technologies, your drones, your GIS, and then environmental DNA is also important. It is a thing which you do, wherein organisms, they are going to leave the genetic material traces. We shed skin, hair, waste products. That DNA you're getting, you're collecting, analyzing it, and then you know which kind of species are present. And this is more cost effective, and it is also less invasive. Okay, it's easier to do. So it also helps uncover rare or elusive species, which you can't find them so easily. Then you have the citizen science initiatives. So for example, iNaturalist or eBird is there. So what happens is the citizens, there are a lot of people, bird lovers. In fact, you have a Hyderabad bird loving bird society also. In fact, they provide valuable data for scientists. In fact, if at all you see, last year I guess there was a news wherein there was a mining area wherein rock mining basically, where somebody had spotted an owl with eggs, and then it was a nest of an owl, of a rare owl. So they had gone requested the concerned authorities to stop doing mining in that particular area for till the young ones had become had hatched, and then the owlets had come out, so that they'll have, because it was their habitat. So this had happened last year. You can check the news. It was in Hyderabad. So how do you document biodiversity? Using taxonomic inventories, museums, herbariums, research institutions. Then digital databases are always there as of now, at least the last 10 years or so. you have the global biodiversity information facility, in fact, and then you have the you need to standardize all of this data that is there so that it is always being maintained. You you need to calibrate the data, see that it is not outdated. Then you have the Darwin Core. It is a metadata standard for biodiversity. It allows the different researchers from different countries to form a better collaboration and move forward along with all of this. So you're going to integrate the status, monitor, and document all the available biodiversity status. You need to have governments and non-profit organizations, colleges or academic institutions, and the local communities to completely come together and work. So you have a convention on the biological diversity, convention on international trade in the endangered species of wild fauna and flora. So this helps in the cooperation and policy alignment, in fact. So now we get to see that how do you understand the status of a biodiversity? How can you make a change to it? How will you monitor that particular change? And how will you help in measuring the progress? How do you identify threats? Put up specific targets, and then at the ground level, you're going to see that you use the observations, then you use your AI, you use databases, and then you have an international collaboration. End of the day, nobody wants the biodiversity to be destroyed. So major drivers of the biodiversity changes like your habitat loss, fragmentation, and degradation. Habitat loss, what is happening? You're converting a forest into cropland or an urban zone. So this deforestation is removing your trees, it is removing your habitats, it is removing the niches for your urbanization. Habitat fragmentation is what happens is isolated patches or roads are being formed, farms are being made. So there is a fragmentation in the habitat. So it will make the species vulnerable. One day it is there was a nest. The next day, you see beside the nest you have a house. Nobody wants human beings to live beside them, the species especially, because it is not their natural habitat anymore. Then degradation. So the quality of habitat is being degraded thanks to pollution, soil erosion, eutrophication. And then the second point, which is going to be a driver of the biodiversity, is your over exploitation of different species. This is seen everywhere. Timber logging, you have wildlife trade, poaching, then you have the fish, overfishing, for example, the predatory fish, if at all they are removed. Then you have the other species coming up. Then you have the non-timber forest products which are exploited again. Then you have the invasive alien species, which is another factor which contributes to the biodiversity declination. So wherein you have the ecological disruption thanks to invasive species. So if you have introduced the brown tree snake, Boiga irregularities to Guam, what happened was the native birds got declined. Disease introduction. Some invasive species carry the pathogens. Then you have the economic and the management costs, which will, you need a lot of reserve, like say, what do you call it, amount to see that everything is happening for conservation. Then you have pollution and contaminants, which keep coming up all the time. And then the chemical pollution, herbicides, heavy metals, industrial effluents, eutrophication. Eutrophication is going to be because of excessive amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, which goes into the water, settles down and causes algal blooms. So what happens is the dissolved biological, oxygen is less. So the species are not able to survive because of the less amount of biological oxygen available. And then you have plastic and microplastic pollution. All of this, apart from that, we have something called as anthropogenic, that is human caused climate change. So with the release of greenhouse gases, and then you have the increase in the temperature, and then you have because of all this, what is happening is the diurnal nocturnal shift is happening, or else phenology changes are there. So example, ecological mismatches. Pollinators, flowering plants should work together at the same time. The bees go to collect nectar from the flowering plant. But if the pollen is not available over there, even if it collects the nectar, it is unable to go and pollinate at different places. So this range shift is occurring. And then you have the coral bleaching and ocean acidification. Whenever the dissolved carbon dioxide levels increase in the water, it causes the production of carbonic acid. So causes stress on the coral reefs, bleaching, reducing the reef resilience. So fewer habitats. And coral biodiversity is one of the best ecological biodiversity available in the whole world, maintain for different kinds of aquatic animals. And extreme weather events such as your tsunamis, wildlife fires, drought storms, all of this will cause a drastic change in the population of the animals. And then you have different kinds of social and economic governance factors such as population growth, governance, and then you do not have proper access to resources, all of it which will cause a decline in the biodiversity. And when it comes to interaction and synergy, then you get to see that all of this has to be interrelated or interconnected so that we develop an integrated conservation measure. It is not just on one footing that some of us do. It is like all of us should make an effort to see that, what do you call it, the biodiversity does not change, because if at all there is any kind of habitat alteration or overexploitation, pollution, all of it are going to maximum they are stemming from human activities. So only if some of us are responsible, that is not going to be helpful. All of us in a collective way should be responsible for the life around us and to maintain the ecosystem. So what are the different kind of management approaches? Again, you have in situ conservation, and then protecting the particular areas and calling them as conservation reserves. So you have in situ, wherein conserving the species in their particular natural habitats. Then landscape level connectivity is wherein you're trying to increase the number of network corridors for the wildlife. So creating the buffer zones so that there is a genetic flow, reduces the risk of local extinction, enhances overall ecosystem resilience. So for example, there was a tiger, female tiger, which had traveled from Maharashtra or down south looking for a mate for during the mating season. So the forest, department had created a corridor so that it will not be able to, it is not restricted to only Maharashtra, but instead it had come down via Karnataka to Telangana and AP. In fact, that is the belt that it had traveled. So that is one way. Assisted regeneration, rewilding, measuring the success. How are you going to do long-term monitoring plan to create so that there is a species richness, soil fertility, hydrological function, all of it is helpful, is maintained. It is helpful to track the progress and then guide the adaptive management. Now, sustainable use and resource management. We need to see how much we are dependent upon the ecosystem for our day-to-day life things. But at the same time, for timber, for any kind of wood or anything, you do not do more over exploitation. So that is where you have the sustainable harvesting and certification. Then you have the agroecology and agroforestry. So that is integrating the biodiversity friendly practices into the agriculture so that it helps in supporting the pollination, soil fertility, and biological pest control. So this will also increase the food security. The livelihood of the farmer is increasing. At the same time, maintaining the habitat quality is also happening. Then you have a community-based and co-management approach. In this, it's usually the indigenous people, meaning the people who are uh, who have been staying in that particular area for generations together. Example, the tribals. And the local people, as people call it, they have a deep ecological knowledge and vested interest in preserving the biodiversity. So when you actually approach them and according to them, you see how what are the strengths, how do you see that that area is actually benefited. At the same time, the people have an income. So you need the government, you need the traditional ecological knowledge for that. Then you need to see that those benefits are shared. You are able to support the livelihood of the people over there. At the same time, you're supporting the biodiversity as such. So this is how you do the community based and co-management. You have one more thing called as the ex situ conservation and genetic management. Over here, you're creating botanical zoological gardens. So you're just creating an area wherein it's either the zoo or the aquarium or the botanical garden, wherein you have different kinds of breeding programs. Then you have a seed bank. You're going to maintain the genetic material. At the same time, try to create a condition, an artificial condition for the particular animal, plant or fungus species to stay, so that it does not get extinct. Of course, you have the cryopreservation sequence and the reintroduction programs. So you try to, whenever there is a particular species which has been completely extinct from a particular area, you try to restore that species into that area again. And then you have the invasive species control and biosecurity measures. Again, identifying the invasive species so that they do not cause more harm. Example, catfish. Then you have the biological control, and then you have to use stringent quarantine and biosecurity measures. So you have trade regulations, travel inspections. Then you need to make public aware of all of this, and accordingly you have your policy makers. So your government makes policies and economic instruments. So you have national, international agreements, then you have economic incentives. So and then you're going to use the biodiversity charter also to plan accordingly, which unfortunately is still not happening everywhere, but that's there. And the eighth one is your adaptive management and continuous learning. So it is a continuous factor which keeps on going. Okay, which is like monitoring, evaluating the particular area, scenario planning, how do you forecast if at all there's any kind of extreme event. It is an again interdisciplinary research. You need to collaborate with different kinds of scientists and government areas, and then like the local communities, the NGOs, the private sector, all of it, so that we try to maintain the biodiversity. So, what is happening loss over here? So, when you talk about the biodiversity loss, you talk about the extinction of species, the genes, ecosystems, in fact. So, now human activities have caused a lot of species to become extinct in the wildlife and completely altogether. So, this is now what is called as the sixth mass extinction. So when you call the biodiversity, how do you define it? Biodiversity loss goes like it includes the species extinction, declination of a particular species population, then you have the habitat simplification. So you have a particular area, for example, a forest. After deforestation, you're making it an agricultural land. When you make it into an agricultural land, what is happening? Only the crops are there. You don't, and then related, what do you call it? And then you have the related, uh, let us say, animals which come over there feeding on the crops. Otherwise, had it been on a forest, you have different kinds of species of animals staying in a forest. So that is your habitat simplification. Then you have functional loss, wherein key species such as predators, pollinators, or seed dispersers, if they are removed, they can disrupt the ecological processes. What are the major drivers of diversity loss? Again, we have just had a look at it. Habitat destruction, fragmentation, overexploitation of resources, invasive species, pollution, climate change, all of these put together. Then you have the ecological consequences that we need to see, which is reduced ecosystem, disrupted food webs, trophic cascades. Then it causes a decline in the ecosystem as well. And then even your social, economic, and cultural facts have an impact on the biodiversity. So when you do overexploiting of food, materials, and medicines, fisheries, they depend on a healthy marine ecosystem. If the fish stock is declined, then you have local economy which comes down. What are the economic costs? Whenever there's a declination in the population, then increase in the prices is there. And if at all there is a loss of pollinators, it increases the need for artificial pollination. So it increases the production cost, food prices. Restoring degraded lands or treating the polluted water, again, it is an expensive process. And then cultural and spiritual value. Many local people, especially the tribals, have a cultural and spiritual practice, which is whenever, sometimes it causes a declination of particular species or a habitat, which is actually less, but not much. Like the loss of the biodiversity, it can remove the cultural identities, traditions. Some people worship the trees. So when those trees are cut, then their spiritual practices also is coming down. Now you have the global trends indicators. You have the red list, IUCN red list. You have the Living Planet Index. You have the International Governmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. All of it, which tell you about how much amount of biodiversity is declining. Then you have the strategies to halt and reverse the biodiversity loss, which is creating protected areas, using sustainable resource management, then trying to control the invasive species, reduce the pollution, all of it, and integrating the local and traditional knowledge. Again, you have to have proper framework, government policies, global agreements, all of it to see that you are able to conserve the biodiversity. And then when it comes to the conservation of natural resources, you get to see that you need to conserve the genetic species and ecosystem diversity. Then see that how it is going to help in creating resilience and adaptability, how it will help in the ecosystem, and what are the cultural and economic benefits. So what are the key strategies for biodiversity conservation? Again, having a protected area and habitat conservation, your national parks, reserves, and marine protected areas. Then you have the landscape connectivity and corridors we created. And how do you do a sustainable management of natural resource through this ecosystem-based management? And then you have a certification and sustainable harvesting. And then you try to do the restoration, rehabilitation of a degraded ecoforestation. That is through reforestation, then trying to preserve the wetland and coral reefs. And then you try to control the invasive species, which is very much necessary. And then you have a climate change, you try to mitigate it and adapt around a particular area, try to reduce the greenhouse gases, then natural methods for sustenance, and incorporating the traditional knowledge that is given. And then, of course, you have the national biodiversity action plans, international treaties and agreements, all of this which is necessary for seeing that the policies are also in place. So this is all about our particular biodiversity conservation, wherein we need to protect habitats and have sustainable living. So this includes local communities, then using technology, using different kinds of policies. You have different kinds of people, the governmental organization, the NGOs, and then you have the the business people also involved, and the local people, so that we have a sustainable environment present. This is all about biodiversity basically. Now we will just have a look at the next lesson, which is biogeography. When it comes to biogeography, it is the scientific study of how the living organisms okay, are distributed across the Earth's surface. And how these patterns help in or are shaped by historical, environmental, and evolutionary factors. In conservation biology, you have there's a crucial role. Basically, what happens is you have the biodiversity hotspots, wherein your biogeography is actually going to help in seeing that. Biogeography has both flora and fauna, and you have different kinds of biodiversity hotspots having exceptional concentration of local species in that particular area, which is very important. Okay, so you need to protect those areas because they have a large number of species and genetic pool present over there. So you need to conserve such an area. Okay, it is absolutely important that you protect such an area. Now you have different kinds of if at all you see how biogeography actually helps us to understand the different kinds of climate changes such as habitat fragmentation, climate shift, and how an invasive species is getting into a particular area and altering the local species over there over the time, because it is not going to be overnight. And it also can predict rain shifts for a future climate scenario, and at the same time how we can create a corridor for the wildlife, and at the same time how are you going to protect an area. Now when it comes to biogeography, we have something called as the biomes. So terrestrial biomes are the huge communities that are present with one particular type of vegetation which is going to dominate that particular area. So you have respective climate according to that particular area, and then how the flora and fauna have adapted to that particular area. So you have major biomes in the world. One is the tundra, then you have the taiga, then you have the desert biome. Then if you see the tundra, it's the coldest and the most extreme. So we are talking about the Arctic region. So what kind? The whole soil has something called as the permafrost. So thick layer of ice will be there. How will plants grow in such areas? What are the plants that are growing? It's usually the fungal community, that is your lichens which are growing over there, mosses are growing, small shrubs, not more than that. And then you have the faunal community. So you have the rainbow, the reindeer, which is caribou, Arctic hares, migratory birds, which fly to another area during summer, etc. So that is one thing. And then you have the boreal forest or the taiga. Taiga is wherein, the northern, the North America, Europe, and Asia have the taiga, the northern areas, the northern latitudes above the Tropic of Cancer. So, harsh, long, cold winters, relatively short, moderate summer is what you're going to have in this particular taiga area. It is dominated by coniferous forests, spruce, fir, and pine. Which open Chava. So you have uh, this particular area having wildlife such as moose, lynxes, and wolves, migratory birds. You have coniferous forests, all of this present over here. Then you have the temperate deciduous forests present in moderate climates such as warm summer, cold winters. So where is it present? In the just below the Tropic of Cancer, areas of Northern Europe, Europe, North America, parts of East Asia. So you have oak, maple, beech, these trees are there. Then you have different kinds of ferns, shrubs, and wildflowers. So you have different kinds of birds over here: songbirds, insects, foxes, deer, squirrels. And these species again, they have their life cycle synchronized with the seasonal changes. So you can talk about like, migration during the summer and storing, migration during the winter. And when you have abundant food in the summer, they store food. In fact, the squirrels and all of that store food for winter. And then you have the temperate grasslands, which are the prairies in the North America, steppes in the Eurasia, and the pampas in the South America. They're all open landscape. They have grasses, herbaceous plants, and then you have different kinds of grazing animals like bison, pronghorn in the North America, saiga, antelope in the Eurasia, and then you have a lot of herding animals. So you have burrowing animals, you have ground nesting animals also over here. And when it comes to the savannas are the between the tropical forests and the deserts. So you have that predominant in Africa, South America, Australia, India. You have grasses, you have certain trees like the acacia and the baobabs, and then you have a little bit of say rainfall in this particular area. There is a distinction between the wet season and the dry season, and then it is warm. The climate is warm throughout the year. What kind of animals do you have in the savannas? You have the elephants, giraffes, zebras, lions, and cheetahs. So they have co-evolved with fire, large herbivores, and predators. So you have all of this, and there is extensive poaching, agricultural expansion, climate shift, which is threatening all these populations. So if you see, largely they're all mammals that are present in this particular area. Now, when it comes to the desert ecosystem, it is seen in Sahara in Africa, Mojave in North America, Gobi in Asia, and of course, we have the cold desert also. The Ladakh region has the desert region and it is cold. So, what are the kind of animals that are present? Specialized mammals that are present. Less water, heat avoidance, cold avoidance, and then you have rodents, reptiles, and they have an adaptability called as the camouflage system. In fact, they do burrowing. They either have estivation or hibernation. And then you have the tropical rainforests, which are present in the equatorial regions, just above and below the equator. So you have it in Central Africa, Southeast Asia, South America, and you have a warm temperature, abundant year-round rainfall, multi-layered vegetation, all of this. You have the canopy area, then you have the what do you call it, epiphytes, you have the understory plants, so and you have a very diverse fauna also present over here, brightly colored birds, insects, amphibians, primates, big cats, and small animals as well. So all of this, again you have deforestation for timber, agriculture, mining, reduces the habitat bioavailability. Now you also have the Mediterranean or the chaparral biome. Over here, what happens is you have the Mediterranean basin, California, Central Chile, South Africa, Southwestern Africa, South Africa's Cape region, Cape World, like Cape Town, such areas, in fact. And of course, so mild, wet winters and hot, dry summers. Even your Greece, Turkey, that area also, you have the Mediterranean region, in fact. Then you have the tropical seasonal deciduous forests present in parts of India, Southeast Asia, and the Central Africa. So over here, you have dropping of the leaves during the dry season to conserve the water. And then when it starts raining again, the vegetation comes up with all leaves and flowers. So flowering occurs. So this terrestrial biomes are very important in trying to conserve the biodiversity because they act as natural reservoirs of the life on Earth. So these biomes act as critical refuges for so many species. Okay, they are also the hotspots for biodiversity. That's what finally we get to see. So then one more thing is we have something called as the theory of island biogeography, which was introduced by Robert MacArthur and Wilson in 1960s. Tries to explain the different kinds of species present in a particular area. So what does it say? That there should be a dynamic equilibrium between the immigration and the extinction of the species, influx of new species and loss of resident species. So when both of them balance, That is when the number of species come to an equilibrium level. Again, this is going to be dependent upon the size of the particular area or island, how much of isolation is present, and what is the equilibrium, how fast or how better is it being achieved, and what exactly is the turnover. Now we have implications regarding them also, because this actually tells us about how we understand a particular species, how we understand the distribution in it. Now, we have quite a lot of biogeography zones and hotspots, especially in India. We have 10 zones. We have the Trans-Himalaya, desert, semi-arid, Western Ghat, Deccan Peninsula, Gangetic Plain, Northeast. Then you have the islands in the coast. So Trans-Himalayas, that is the Ladakh and northern Sikkim. And you have different kinds of animals like the Tibetan antelope and the Himalayan ibex. The Himalayan region, and that is like, it is from the subtropical foothills in the south to the alpine meadows and permanent snowfields in the north. Total complete India's northern border. So you have different kinds of flora and fauna living over there. Then you have the desert region, that is primarily the Thar, and you have the Ladakh area also. Different kinds of flora is present and fauna. The desert foxes, Indian gazelles, the great Indian bustard, all of it. Then you have the semi-arid zone lying east of Thar. So this is wherein, you have the Deccan Plateau and central India. So you have different kinds of black buck, Indian wolf, grassland birds, all of it staying. And then you have the Western Ghats. It is a huge global biodiversity hotspot. Nilgiri Thar, then you have Malabar Giant Hill, and then you have evergreen forest, sholas, high rainfall, all of it present in the Western Ghats. And then you have the Deccan Peninsula. So you have the teak, sal forests. You have different kinds of tigers, leopards that are growing over, like present over there. Then when it comes to the Gangetic Plain, the fertile area of the Ganges. So it includes the home for Indian rhinoceros, Asian elephant, Bengal florican, etc. Northeast India is again, a huge biodiversity trove. In fact, it has full tropical. In fact, the highest rainfall areas in the world are present over there in Northeast India, the Cherrapunji and the Mawsyn Meghalaya. And so you have different kinds of rich, like, flora and fauna in such kind of areas. And then you have the islands, the Andaman and the Nicobar Island. Archipelago means group of islands, the Bay of Bengal and the Lakshadweep. Isolated ecosystems. Andaman has a tropical rainforest ecosystem over there. You have different kinds of animals. And the coastal, India's extensive coastline surrounding or three-fourths of the Indian area, in fact, to the west, to the east, and the south, has different kinds of flora and fauna present here. So this is absolutely important that we maintain this particular region, so that we have we are able to conserve the different kinds of species that are present. So in the desert and in the Himalayas, you have the Himalayan ibex, and then golden langur, etc. In the desert and the semi-arid areas, you have the desert fox, spiny-tailed lizard, Indian gazelle or the chinkara. Then in the Deccan region, you have the lion-tailed macaque, Nilgiri langurs. Then Malabar giant squirrels. Then you have the Gangetic snake. The Gangetic dolphin is present. Then in the northeast, you have the hornbills. And then you have the, what do you call it, in the island region also different kinds of crocodiles that are present in the wetlands. Then our hornbill is present. All of this. So you have again different kinds of biodiversity hotspots in India. You have the Eastern Himalaya hotspot, Northeast region. India, Bhutan, Nepal is is one hotspot. Then you have the Indo-Burma hotspot that is present. So it includes the Northeast India, Myanmar, Southern China, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, and Vietnam. All of these are interconnected, and then that is a huge area for biodiversity, and it is a biodiversity hotspot. And then you have the Western Ghats, and then come down, it is the Sri Lanka. This is one belt. So right from Maharashtra onwards, then you have the Karnataka, and then you have the Tamil Nadu, and then you have the Kerala, and then down, though there is a sea, it still has, like, the connectivity with Sri Lanka. So this is having a lot of importance for different kinds of reptiles, mammals, and endemic plants. All right. And then you have the Sundaland and the Nicobar Islands in India. This is composed of Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, parts of South Thailand, and Philippines. All of this is known as the Sundaland, along with your North, Nicobar Islands of the Andaman and Nicobar archipelago. This has mangroves, coral reefs, tropical forests, and then it has species like the Nicobar megapode, all of it present. So you need to absolutely see that we are able to conserve this particular area. So what are the challenges that we have? How to integrate the complete landscape altogether? We need to have stronger policies and stronger, stringent law enforcement against poaching, illegal trade. We need to see there is a sustainable livelihood, economic improvement for the local people. That is the whole point. So all of this highlight the nation's global ecological significance that is present. So this is your chapter 15. We talk about your biogeography, terrestrial biomes, and then what is exactly island biogeography, how the biogeographical zones are present, and what are the biogeographical or biodiversity hotspots. Now, when it comes to the last topic, we have how global environmental problems that we have, are creating an issue, and what are the conservation strategies that are present. So when you get to see the global environmental problems, you get to see that end of the day, it is the population explosion, rapid increase in the population. What the population was the 16th century, today it is 100 times more, if I'm not wrong. That is the kind of population explosion that has happened. So advances in medical science, safer childbirth, better disease control has decreased the death rate. So, and cultural religious traditions as well as limited access to family planning can sustain high fertility rates, especially in the developing countries. So, what are the consequences and the challenges that we are facing because of this rapid increase in population? So, more requirement for food, water, energy, resources, so competition for that. So, you have the declination on the nature, wherein we are depending upon food, and then you have, because of this increasing challenge, provide adequate healthcare, education, housing, sanitation. So there is more amount of urbanization. So to keep up with this, it is also causing unemployment, underemployment, and increased poverty rates. All of this has created different kinds of issues. Apart from that, in densely populated areas, you have traffic congestions, improper waste management, because of which increase in pollution, reduced quality of life. So all of this is profound. It is finally affecting people at the same, at individual level, and at the same time global level, causing pollution, greenhouse gases emission, and climate change, biodiversity loss. So how do you manage this population growth? How do you tackle it? So you need to see that you need to know about the current kind of population that is there, study, that is your anthropology, and then analyzing the birth rates, the death rates, migration patterns, age structures. You can come up with a particular policy, social planning, and resource allocation. So finally, when you get to see that, population influx causes infrastructure development, transportation network, and availability of different kinds of social services. So high population area causes overcrowding, strain on the natural resources, environmental degradation. Age-sex ratio also makes a difference. Okay, and a population with high young individuals will actually emphasize on the educational employment opportunities. Aging population will look at healthcare, pension, social security system, and all of it. And when it comes to fertility, mortality, and migration, you get to see that all of this impact the population diversity. Fertility rate is wherein, the average number of children born per woman, and mortality rate is the likelihood of death in a given year, and migration rate measures the movement of people across the regions. Together, they will tell us about the population. And how are you going to apply this demographic, how are you going to implement it? You have economic planning, you have to make policies properly to ensure resources are allocated fairly, efficiently. You have the public health and social services, that is, demographers work closely with the health professionals to understand the patterns, basically cause or use the introduce vaccination campaigns, nutritional programs, etc. You need to have proper urban planning and environmental management so that there is a little bit of distribution. And then when you see the history of the human population growth, you have the early human societies. They were hunter-gatherers. Then you had the agricultural revolution, wherein people went into farming. Then you had the pre-industrial societies where early civilization, urbanization started. Introduction to the factories. Then happened in the 18th century industrial revolution, wherein many kinds of factories just came up. And in the 20th century, you had the population explosion, you had the medical agricultural innovations, and along with it, you had a lot of disparity globally. And in the 21st century, we are trying to slow the growth. We are seeing, we have understood the kind of challenges that we are facing, and there is a declining fertility rate throughout the world. And you have women's empowerment, access to family planning, all of it, which has given the choice of, let us say, not having more children, because of which, there is a decline in the population. So yes, that will also help in trying to reduce the impact on the world as such. So what are the different kinds of factors regulating the human population? Resource availability has always been there. So you have the hunter-gatherer societies, agricultural revolution took place, then a lot of diseases and epidemics. You had pandemics in the beginning of the, say, 19th century, beginning of the 18th century. Then you had in the beginning of the 20th century, early 2000s, 2020, we had a pandemic. Everyone knows about it. And then, all of this has caused, in say a span of a year or two, a declination in the what do you call it, in the population suddenly. So the survival of the fittest. Then improving the public health measures has also been there. Give me 5 minutes. I'll finish the class by 12 o'clock. Please don't stop before that. Then you have cultural norms. So you have marriage customs and family sizes, which finally, we have come to the fact that smaller families are much more economically sustainable. Then you have different kinds of economic, technological inventions, that is your agricultural and industrial revolutions, then migrational and environmental factors. So migration, voluntarily or forcefully, has created openings for going to different places. So with that, there's been either constraint on the environment, overpopulation at one place, underpopulation at one place. So that has changed a lot of dynamics. So, and when it comes to the global environmental problems, we have the global warming, greenhouse gases causing the greenhouse effects. What are they? Carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxides, all of it trap heat, causes increase in the temperature, increase in the sea levels. So industrialization, land use changes. So we are clearing deforestation, draining wetlands, expanding urban areas, industrialization, setting up so many factories, consuming, then releasing down the effluents, all of it. So what are the consequences? Rising sea levels, extreme weather events, El Nino, La Nina coming at the wrong times, ecosystem, biodiversity loss, food, water security. All of this is the consequence. Finally, you have the protective measures and mitigation strategies. How do you do that? By trying to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, by adopting the sustainable agriculture land management, by improving the transportation systems, by trying to improve or increase the carbon sinks, and trying to have a negative emissions technology, and by building the climate resilient structures. and earthquake resilient structures, drought resistant crops, early warning systems, all of it. And then you need to have an international cooperation. You have to have a good policy framework, seeing that all of it is being implemented. You have to have conventions to see that reductions, greenhouse gases are reduced, all of it together. Now you also have the depletion of ozone layer because of the chlorofluoro and the halocarbons present. And then you have the industrial agricultural effluents which are being released down, which causes the ozone layer to be depleted. What are the impacts of it? Increased UV radiation, damage to ecosystem and agriculture, climate interactions also is being damaged. How do you prevent? By using having the Montreal Protocol, which was aimed to deplete the CFCs, in fact, substitute, use green technologies, and then see that you have more public awareness. We also have the acid rains, which has caused a lot of damage to different kinds of areas such as the Black Triangle. The Taj Mahal has been affected. The US areas have been affected because of acid rain, because of the industrial effluents, fossil fuels burning, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide being released into the air. So damage to ecosystem, aquatic life, corrosion of the different kinds of uh, say buildings, structures. Human health is also being damaged. How do you prevent? Again, sustainable clean energy is being used. How do you conserve all of this finally? By using or employing conservative strategies such as the protected areas institute conservations, that is national parks, wildlife sanctuaries. You have the Kaziranga and the Gir. Then you have the ex situ conservation strategies, that is your zoos, botanical gardens in all places, seeds, banks, gene banks. Then you have the legal frameworks, your Wildlife Protection Act, Forest Conservation Act, Biodiversity Act. Then you have the community participation and traditional knowledge. Use the indigenous community. So, for example, Kashi community in Meghalaya protect forest patches known as sacred groves. So this helps in survival of unique orchards and medicinal plants. So the tribal people have the best knowledge of that particular area. So that is one thing. Then you have wildlife institutes, Dehradun and research centers. International cooperation is absolutely necessary. And then you have laws such as the environmental protection law. Then you have the mandates, legislations. So you have the Water Act, Air Act, Environment Protection Act, Wildlife Protection Act, all of it. So finally, you have to have used the tools. Give me 2 minutes more. 2 minutes more, please. Tools and mechanisms are the environmental impact assessment. Then you have the different kinds of pollution control boards, National Green Tribunal, and this is how we have. So we have the challenges which include limited resources already. You have to see that administration works slowly, inadequate public awareness. We need to go build around it. So you have the Earth Summit which happened in the Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, which talked about all such kind of challenges. So finally, the initiative was that you have to reduce the deforestation. See that there is a little bit less amount of climate change occurring. Still on the process. So finally, they have drafted a lot of proposals, came up with guiding principles and all of it, and then this has to be implemented by us today. So what is the impact again? So successively, it has shown how we have to go forward and how we have to do the development for the biodiversity basically. So India's stand has been that it is we have to see that we need to cut down on our pollution levels, and then at the same time see that initiating a global dialogue, we need to draft comprehensive proposals, widespread implementation of all these together. So this is how we have to work it. So this is how so finally you come to this global environment